Hello and welcome to Talking Shit About, a monthly podcast where I, Elizabeth Whipperman, interview someone about something they love, something they hate, something they've been through, or something they just know a lot about, and hopefully by the end we've all learned something. I'm joined in my newly established studio in my loft in my house with the cats Bod, Amp, and Leonard, who you will be hearing more of instead of the dogs. Hopefully it's less distracting. However, they are crawling all over the microphone and my computer, so we'll see how this goes. Before we get started, I have a few thank yous I want to get through. First off, thank you to my Patreon subscribers. That's Helen, my mom, Cassie, Josh, and Cece for their support. And I'd also like to thank those of you who have purchased items off of my Amazon wishlist to help me get this studio up and running. So thank you, Kat, Leslie, Helen, my mom again, my Uncle Billy, and Sebastian. I am so grateful to have this space, and it is so calming and peaceful, and I just can't express how grateful I am. We have officially been doing the podcast for 4 years, which is super exciting. I'm so grateful for all the listens and for all of the guests for coming on the show. Speaking of the show, today we have Ali Greco, who is a mental health professional and sounds like a super cool mom. So I'm really excited for this conversation. It's super fluid. She was such a fun guest to have on the show. So without further ado, let's go ahead and talk some shit.
I was like, what the fuck does that mean? I have friends that are firefighters and I know that they use soap.
And she was screaming at me over soup.
Fuck this, I am not ever talking to a Scientologist again. These people are all insane.
I'm putting my bricks in the dumpsters, motherfuckers. Do you see me, bitches? I'm throwing my bricks. And he's just like chucking bricks.
Hello, everybody. We are on Talking Shit About, and I'm here today with Ali Greco, and we're going to talk about some mental health. We're going to talk about, is it parathera? Is that how you say it?
Yeah, exactly, parathera.
Awesome. But before we dive in, all right, Ali, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Would you like to introduce yourself? This is always a tough question for people, but introduce yourself, what you do, just kind of things that make you click.
Sure, yeah, hi. First, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. I am a clinical psychologist by training, but I have spent a lot of my career in user experience design and research. So I'm old enough to have been around at the very start of UX and went back to graduate school, and partially because my manager when I was at Microsoft said, you need an advanced degree. And so I went and got a clinical degree that sort of worked in multiple domains. So I have experience in working in forensics, so that would be in the prison system. I also worked in community mental health and organizational development. And so that's how I ended up going back into software development after my graduate studies. And now that I'm in a position in my life where my son is now in college, I spent a lot of my time focused on him. He's on the autism spectrum, and I needed to make sure that he had everything he needed to be able to thrive. And now he's in college, and I'm in a position where I'm able to kind of look around and see how I can better contribute to the world besides just helping software not suck as much as it does. So I started parathera because I see that there is a need in the market for emotional support and human connection that isn't specific to therapy, therapy being a really important modality and way of healing people, but it is a limited resource, and there are ways that we can help people before or while they're in therapy that doesn't require the same level of rigor and depth that therapy does. And so that's really what I'm bringing with parathera. So that's sort of my career arc. And I, as far as sort of who I am, I live in this world, so things are fraught and difficult. But at the same time, I have a close-knit group of girlfriends and family, and I'm really focused in that way on community, because I think it's really the only way that we move forward to get through all of these challenges, both internal and out in the world. So that's me.
Gotcha. And we hadn't really talked about this beforehand, so if we don't want to dive into it, that's totally fine.
Yeah.
But I just recently got provisionally diagnosed with autism, so I am in the process of exploring that and all of the things that make me tick that I've masked over the years and stuff. And so I'm very interested in hearing more about that. Did you know much about autism before you had your son and before he was diagnosed?
Yeah, so I didn't know a great deal. My son was born in 2004 when I was just after my first year in graduate school. So it turned out that as I had a baby, I was also studying child development and sort of the different disorders that we could be seeing through the DSM. And so it was just this sort of interesting confluence where I happened to be both living it with my son and studying it in grad school at the same time. So I didn't know a lot, but I can tell you that Massimo's symptoms it just started at birth. So his, I guess I wasn't going to say his nervous system, the way that his body responded to all of the sensory input of being in this world was very overwhelming for him from babyhood. And so figuring out how to best meet his needs. I think being able to understand autism was challenging, especially then, because there was not a lot of body of research on it from, sort of babyhood. There was what was going on with sort of, developmentally being fine and then regressing. Moss never had that. His name is Massimo, by the way. So if I call him Moss, that's why. And so it was really challenging in the beginning to really understand how to best meet his needs. But that was my goal. I think the training that I had in understanding the role of parent was that it was my job to help him regulate, understand how he was going to be successful in the world. And so that meant that I had to go and do a lot of figuring it out with him. But really it was a matter of how do I make it so that he is most comfortable and most secure so that he has all the resources he needs to be able to move forward in the world. So that was always my philosophy, and figuring that out was a lot of trial and error, to be honest with you, and some luck. I've had the opportunity. I went to the OHSU system when he was officially diagnosed at 3, but before that, he had really all the classic symptoms of a developmental delay.
Well, that's beautiful, your
So he
approach, I
didn't
think.
walk in the traditional way. It took him a long time. I appreciate that. It really was, I think, how I would have approached it with anybody, with any child that we had. But this one was so clear that whatever you would read in a traditional, baby rearing book wasn't going to work for this poor child. And so I think I learned a lot about autism from Massimo, but I also just learned a lot about Massimo as a person. He's currently in the kitchen making biscuits and gravy because that's what he wanted.
Awesome.
But if there's something in particular about like his flavor of autism or the way that we went through the testing or other elements of kind of his educational life, I'm anything that is of interest, let me know.
Yeah, absolutely. So on the podcast, we've talked a little bit in previous episodes about, the experiences of being someone diagnosed with like OCD, schizophrenia, bipolar, and navigating mental health systems that way. So if you could give us like a perspective of what it's any like additional barriers or challenges that people with autism face, getting care. I'd love to hear
Oh,
about that.
sure. So many. I'm grateful that people like Massimo and the generation before him, who are now adults and operating in the world, are so good at advocating for themselves. That services and language, even your podcast, people talking about these things, are so much more readily available than they were 20 years ago. And so I think the recognition and the ability to find community are so much better than they were. When Massimo was little, he didn't actually have a lot of physical ailments. So finding treatment was difficult because it was trying to figure out who would offer the right kind of help. So, we would start off with his PCP, his doctor. And his doctor's like, well, he's just really healthy. Like, I don't know what I would offer. Sensory integration issues were not something that the general medical community had really any understanding of at all. And so long as Massimo was healthy, physically eating, and all of his systems were operating, they didn't really know what to do. And so then I moved into more of the educational area, because I was like, okay, well, if he's got developmental delays, then it's going to show up in the education world. And so then trying to find the right kind of supports in education is really scattered. I ended up finding a preschool that was in Portland, focused just on children on the spectrum. At that time, it was largely boys, because they hadn't really figured out how girls develop differently with autism and how they mask so quickly. And they are so very good at it. So we still had many more boys in the program than girls. But that was really perhaps the most helpful place, was finding the community. And then it was a matter of sort of doing a lot of trial and error with other people's support. What's working for your child? How is your child different than my child? And really then figuring out, like, who are you working with? But a lot of it was educational and not within what I would consider to be the traditional medical community, and then figuring out how to get it paid for. I don't think in America we support families at all in this way. I ended up, because I was in grad school, just taking out loans. I took out loans that would cover grad school, and then cover, I got a nanny to help me so I could stay in grad school, and that's how I paid her. And so I just went into debt. I don't know how other people have done it. I will be paying this off the rest of my life, with absolutely no regret. I think it was in every respect the right thing to do. But there's no way to do it without in some way doing trade-offs. You either don't get the care because you don't have the resources, or you go into debt to get them. And so those were the ways in which I felt like the system simply required that I put in all of the labor, find the groups, figure out who to talk to. I felt immensely lucky as someone who was connected to the psychological community, that I could just ask people, who do you know, who's studying this, what's happening, and if you were coming at it from a different background, I think it would be even that much more difficult. But certainly not having the resources, didn't have any family money. I was just playing it quarter by quarter.
So earlier you mentioned connection with the other, kids at that school or program. Can we talk a little bit about human connection and its importance?
Oh yeah, boy. I don't think, we have a culture that really values individualism and puts a lot of emphasis on how you as a person are required to show up in the world. And I think it does us all a disservice by not recognizing that there has never been a time in human evolution from the very beginning that we weren't in community with each other, and that it is absolutely fundamental to our ability to thrive in this world that we connect with other humans. And our culture really, I think, has pushed us about as far as we're going to go to be individual and take, individual responsibility, and sort of not recognize how important it is to be connected to other humans. I don't think there's a way that we could survive without other people. And I see it, one of the goals that Massimo and I had together, we used to take these walks. We lived in Northeast, and we would, there's some long, like, corridors, like the Klickitat little corridor, that are without cars. And so he and I would walk, and he would talk to me about whatever his particular deep interest was. He would, love trains or elevators, kind of those standard, like, little boy deep interests. And so I would listen to him, and then we would talk about kind of my job as his mother to help him be independent and to thrive, but also to figure out how to be in connection with other people. And that those two things were both important. And in those conversations, talking about sort of how the autism and the way that his brain sort of looks at the world, how are some of the things that we could do that would make him extraordinary? And then what were the ways that we needed to support him so that he could be more able to operate in a world that wasn't set up for him? And I feel like while that was really specific to the way Massimo's brain works, that's not actually unique. That's true of all of us. That I also need to have connection with my people to then figure out the ways in which I can be extraordinary, but also to support me in those ways in which this world is not set up for me either.
Mm-hmm.
If it were, man, I would probably be living. My girlfriends and I have this joke that we will have the Silver Beaver Ranch when we all get older. And we'll all live on this ranch together, kind of, Golden Girls style, but with our own like tiny houses. And then you'll have like the main house. And if society really appreciated what it means to be connected, that would be the sort of thing that we would all just fund for each other.
That's beautiful.
So human connection, I feel like, is fundamental. I worked in software. It's not that I don't actually value what technology can offer. And in fact, often when I'm feeling despair, I will go and try to figure out what like new scientific discovery has occurred, or some way that we're going to cure something that has burdened humans and our squishy little bodies. And that way I get hope from innovation and technology. But I really fundamentally believe that the way that we heal and move forward is through human connection. And even just our voices here is stronger and more warmth and acceptance than you're going to get from reading an email or having an avatar talk to you. And so while I think information and practice and skill building are all things that technology can do, I don't believe that technology at its fundamental basis can actually be healing. I think it's people, and that knowledge is how we actually help each other and heal each other.
Yeah, like I well, I was gonna say recently, it's been about 5 years, moved to a rural area, and I keep telling myself that I'm going to stay on social media because, oh, I'm more connected to people, but a lot of times just feel more lonely by the end. So yeah, I'm trying to work on finding more in-person connections and actual one-on-one conversations because
For
you're totally
real.
right. Yeah.
I also like social media for the sheer breadth of people that I get to connect with, right? So like I was telling my husband recently about sort of my Threads feed, and that there are like really distinct groups of people that I like sort of interacting with, or at least learning from. So I've got like, I don't know, physical therapists who are teaching me things. And then I've got, chefs who are showing me how they're operating in their kitchens. And then you've got artists and writers who are showing you their work. That sort of stuff I could not do in a small community. Like, I love that sort of broad exposure to what people are capable of and who they are. But I recently made two new friends. I was at a restaurant eating dinner by myself, and struck up a conversation with both the bartender and one of the women at the bar. And it sounds so terribly cliche, but they were just lovely. And we've now met up for tea, and we would just went to the No Kings protest, and I met up with them. And like, I gotta say, making friends, I'm 50, in person, and being able to know that like I can still do that. It was kind of like being at the playground and being like, oh my gosh, we both like the same music. Like,
That's awesome.
it was terrific. And I highly, like, I think being able to call upon them and know that I could see them, and that if I needed something real in my daily life, that there are people that I can call on. That is a level of security that I haven't always had. I think that was one of the real fractures of COVID, was that if you were too online, then the reality of a physical need was something that could go unmet, that was kind of scary. And so I think finding that balance where I think social media has a great place in the world, but it can't be a replacement for physical and close connected people who honestly, who's going to come to the hospital when you need them? Who's going to bring you food? Who's going to give you the ride to the airport? Like, how do we do that without community?
So I'm curious if there are other, aside from connection, any other things that come to mind that you think are important for our mental health, whether that be for people on the spectrum or just everybody in general?
Oh yeah, sure. I think one of the lessons that I learned in parenting Massimo was that in our culture, we have really specific scripts that we're supposed to follow. So like you're going to go to school and you're going to learn certain things at a certain time, and then you're going to get out of school and you're going to go to college or you're going to get a job. And that like things are scripted out for us as what's, sort of acceptable. And that those scripts are wrong. They're just
Mm-hmm.
not, they need to be updated, they need to be expanded. Like those scripts are just, I think they put a lot of us in a position of feeling like we're out of step and we're failing when we're not fulfilling whatever it is that the script has told us we're supposed to be doing. And interestingly enough, the script ends at like 50, right now in my life. It's like, oh, you had a career and then retirement, maybe. And then you just sort of fall off a cliff. Like there's nothing after that. And so I think for all of us in our society, being able to question the script that we think that we're following, is it ours? Is it something that we got from our families?
I know my own destiny, Uncle.
Is it your own destiny? Or is it a destiny someone else has tried to force on you?
I think having a path is important, and figuring out how to understand your own script is a lot of work. And so I can certainly see why people are like, no, it's helpful if somebody tells me what right looks like. But I think with Massimo, I had to really figure out what part of that script was going to be something that served him and what part of that script wasn't, so that I could loosen up the sort of, as parent, give him permission to deviate from that. So I'll give you a couple of examples. One was I knew that because of his developmental delay that he wasn't going to do well in traditional school. So we chose the Montessori system because Montessori sort of groups people together in like 3-year cohorts. So you're in lower elementary until you go to upper elementary. And so you can work on things at whatever your speed. So if you happen to be particularly good at something, you could be working at a much higher level than somebody else, because they recognize that children develop not in this sort of linear cohort kind of way. And so there was, I got to work with a teacher. Just this is where luck comes in. Massimo had the same teacher for 6 years. And so she and I got to have these like long-term goals together. And so there's this 1 year where Massimo basically he read one book just over and over and over again. And he was absorbing what was going on around him, but he just wasn't in a place where he was ready to engage. And because I had the opportunity to work with this particular teacher so long, and she saw what his developmental arc looked like, he got to just read this one book and kind of participate in the class as he was capable, giving him that room to grow without pressure to live up to some particular goal that wasn't his own, was a kind of privilege and luxury that I think very few people have, and that I wish we could give to more people and give to ourselves. He took a year between high school and college, that sort of gap year. We explored some things. He was interested in perhaps going into the Coast Guard. And so we worked on what it would take to get him into the Coast Guard. That was actually the very first time in his life that he's ever been told that he couldn't do something specifically because of the autism. That the Coast Guard does not let someone with autism into their service. And I am deeply skeptical that they don't have people on the spectrum in their service, but they absolutely rule it out. And it isn't based on any kind of, he was able to do all of the testing. He did fine. He could have met every criteria they asked for, but they simply wouldn't even let him try. And that was really the first time that I had run into that kind of like just hard no. And let me tell you, that really hurts. That feels terrible.
Yeah.
And so we gave him time to recover from that and to relax after working really hard in high school and then starting college. And starting college was his choice, you know, lots of figuring out what he wanted to do next. But I think it takes time and figuring out how to give yourself that space. I think people will say they're stuck, or other people will judge you because you're moving more slowly than the script says you're supposed to. And in this case, I really feel kind of like a rebel against our cultural norms, that like all of it is wrong.
Mhm.
And so all of us who struggle in this world, depression, anxiety, but you know, ADHD, all of those things are worse in environments that tell us that we're wrong, that tell us that we have to do things in a specific way and in a specific time and in a specific order. And I think that finding community that enables us to have space and reinforces the messages that inherently you are good inherently, and then operating in a system that isn't set up for us is the challenge. And trying to fundamentally help people understand that the trauma that we've all encountered, trauma small t, in addition to trauma big T, is only improved by having an environment that allows us to stretch out and find our own way through.
That was beautiful. Yeah, just a silly little anecdote.
Yeah.
The other day so when I like find a new song that I like, I will listen to that sucker on repeat for days, weeks. And I'm guessing that's the autism, but then the bipolar part of my brain is like has that paranoia of I'm always being watched. And so I'm like, oh, well, somebody's looking at my algorithm and seeing that I'm listening to the same song over and over and over. And then I had the realization of like, even if they were, what does it matter? If I like this song, I could listen to this song, only this song, for the rest of my life, every day, and it wouldn't matter.
Right?
And having that realization just like opened up the world. So I wish more people could have that realization that you just explained so well.
Yeah, it's so important that we get the messages in our own algorithm, right? Like we're being played by the larger world's algorithm, but we ourselves have our individual ones, the things that optimize our own brain chemistry. So I was just cycling back to the things I've learned in social media. There's a sound psychologist that I follow. And when you talk about listening to that song over and over and over again, that from this sound psychologist perspective is literally soothing particular parts of your neurochemistry. And it's so important when you find those things that you don't preemptively stop yourself from finding the stuff that works for your brain because some other person wouldn't like it. That is, I think, exactly why it's important to have permission to do the things that help us. So like, is it a stim? Yeah, sure. Stims are amazing. I kind of wish I had one. I probably do. I just don't call it that, right? And they're soothing and they are exactly what your body wants. And so let's give it to it, because what's the harm? Literally, there isn't a bad downside to this, except that somebody from the outside might somehow be bored. But we're not, I'm not worried about them. That's not who I'm taking care of. Your algorithm has told you something that works. Oh, we're diving in. That was really it. Like with Moss's stem, whichever one, figuring out context, like the when and how, what would be more socially normative, what would be something that wouldn't make him be ostracized by other people, but in the privacy of his own space. Oh no, I mean, you want to draw numbers in the air with a particular pencil that shines and it's relaxing all day long. I will literally, and have done, buy you bags and bags of pencils, whatever it is that suits you. Go soothe. I wish other people knew how to soothe as well. As somebody who was highly anxious and had a really hard time finding ways to self-soothe, watching someone so naturally find something that calms their neurochemistry is amazing.
Mm-hmm. It's so funny. Sorry, I keep bringing it back to myself, but like I
Yeah,
said, I'm like
please.
in this journey of these daily realizations. But many years ago, I had this therapist and I went up to her and I was like, somebody said I might be autistic. And she was like, oh, no, absolutely not. And so just for years, I was like, okay, clearly I'm not. This one professional says I'm not. And then I was just realizing you were mentioning, self-soothing, and I was picturing myself when I get overwhelmed crawling under my weighted blanket in my weighted hoodie. And it's like, yeah. But actually, I think part of it was because social media and seeing not only like my personal friends share their own experiences with autism, but the algorithm started feeding me things and I was like, oh, that's relatable. And so I went to my psychiatrist and my therapist and was like, hey, what do you guys think about this? And so we started doing, they started asking me some questions and then I had a lot of oh shit moments. And then my psychiatrist recommended Unmasking Autism. And full disclosure, I've only read the introduction, but it fucked me up. I had to stop reading it for a bit and put it down because I was just bawling. I had to again get under my weighted blanket just because I was like, oh my God, I feel so seen. And so that again, bringing it back to the connection, just so important.
Walk around, it goes back to that being individual and having sort of a one size fits all script. You're supposed to be responsible for fitting in a specific way that our culture says is acceptable. And there's so many ways to not be acceptable. It's almost infinite. And to then find an opportunity to say, now there's an explanation for why I don't feel like I fit is so healing. It almost in many ways doesn't matter the flavor of autism, this type of this sort of description of symptoms, so long as the understanding that those symptoms are natural to the way that your body and your brain are wired, and that is entirely acceptable. I think that's really the benefit of having sort of mental health not be as vilified and sort of in the dark, and even the language of mental health being much more acceptable and normative, is that we all get an opportunity to say how I'm made is okay, and that the world that I'm operating in isn't set up for me. It's set up for marginal white men. And marginal white men have a lot of insecurity. So the world is set up in a way to exclude most of us. I certainly have, sensory integration challenges, and my, I always was sort of overly sensitive and given those messages. And, when helping to understand how to give somebody else what they need, and then being able to recognize it on my own, and be able to give myself that. I'm so grateful that social media has enabled us to see more of each other in a way that expands what is okay. And it just makes the script, if you're in a small town, and you didn't have access to any of this information, why wouldn't you think that you're the problem? That's what everybody around you is going to tell you. Why would you not believe that? And yet that is one of the most destructive messages that we all get, all of us, that somehow, for some reason, the way that we are in the world is unacceptable. And if I can do anything in the time I have left on this planet, it is to try to counteract that message. I really want this concept of unconditional positive regard. It's a really high bar. I think somebody that I talked with recently called it sort of a Zen goal, that to be unconditionally in a place with everybody that you interact with and hold them in positive regard is incredibly difficult. And that's not to say that you don't have boundaries. That's not to say you don't protect yourself. There were people who we should not judge. We should not judge. But in a therapeutic environment, or in a goal where the person I'm working with, my goal is to help them in some way, the underpinnings of unconditional positive regard are how we get to healing. Because in that moment, in that place, that person that I'm working with, that I'm talking to, is fundamentally okay, period. Because that's what is necessary for healing. And so when I work with clients and I train other paratherapists to work with clients, the fundamental stance of everything that we do is rooted in unconditional positive regard. It's hard, but it is, I think, absolutely necessary. And I wouldn't say I always do it, but I try. When I worked in the prison system, I ended up doing therapy with some people who had done some terrible things. But that doesn't mean that they are fundamentally terrible people. They're human, and they have behaviors and coping mechanisms and trauma and things that make their behavior wrong, period. Mm-hmm. But in the moment of working with them in that room, they are people, they are human. And it is my job to find a way to bring the positive regard in an unconditional way. I don't know how else that we move forward and heal each other. And so that's really what I'm trying to bring.
Speaking of other things that you're doing, let's hear about Parathera.
Yeah, I appreciate it. So Parathera is my reaction to a couple of things that are going on in mental health. We have just a huge need for help. People need help. Our communities are splintered. We have a hard time connecting with each other. Our routines are disrupted. That there's lots of reasons for us to not trust people. And so there's a real need out there, not even just in the US, but like globally, for help and for people that you can trust to support you through whatever's happening in your life. And right now, therapy is really the only modality that we've got. You've got coaching, counseling, therapy. And the challenge that I have with those isn't in whether or not they're effective. Effectiveness is absolutely proven. It's that they are not accessible because they're expensive, because it is 50 minutes every week. It's a particular way of working with people that is hard to get. And then the people who offer the service have to go through a lot of training and credentialing. And so there's just not enough of them, right? So the accessing therapy is very difficult. And then keeping access, you find that the right therapist, it takes a while to find the right therapist. You might not have somebody who is actually helpful for you. So you have to go like therapist shopping. Like it is really difficult to get that help. The other piece about therapy and coaching is that it is really focused on change. It's focused on moving you from a hurt place to a better place, wellness and healing. And it is focused on, at least from the insurance side, which is the side that I find most frustrating, it is focused on symptom reduction. And that is what is the focus, which is why you have a diagnosis and why you have particular symptoms, and insurance companies want to see that those symptoms are getting better. And when they get better, you lose access because they have gotten what they need. Whether you've gotten what you need is somewhat incidental. So
Oh,
I,
sorry, real quick. Is that why
yeah,
they do the anxiety and depression assessments every year?
yeah, yeah. And in some practices, they do it every session, and you'll get,
Huh.
3 or 4 sessions. And once you get to below clinical level, insurance will say that they're not going to cover it anymore because you're not diagnostically suffering enough. That's exactly why. And so as a therapist, I found it wildly unethical because once I got somebody to a place where they were maybe subclinical in their symptoms, we now finally had space to actually do healing, because the symptoms were often the thing that were keeping you kind of stuck and not being able to move forward or examine patterns or really get to the root of some things. And that was when I would lose access to them because they didn't have insurance coverage anymore, which I found absolutely maddening. Um, and so we really emphasize diagnosis and symptom reduction because we have medicalized the mental health field, because that's how in America things get paid. Or you do self-pay, but the modality doesn't change. And so then it's just really expensive to see someone who has gone through, 6 years of education and training and credentialing. They deserve their $125 to $200 an hour. And when they do sliding scale, then they can only see so many people. So being able to give people what they need and pay for it. And so what I was recognizing in both my graduate work and then when I was I was a director of user experience for a therapy platform. It's called Sondermind. And the sort of goal that Sondermind had was to have I love the algorithm, match you with a therapist. So based on the way you answer some questions, it would find a therapist that kind of met your needs. At least that was the goal that they had. And so I was doing some research with people to try to figure out, like, what do you need from therapy? Like, what is it that so we could make this algorithm work better. I wanted to understand what people were looking for. And I realized that there's a big group of people who are going through life transitions. And this happens in all of our lives, but we go through these transitions. And in them, that's when we need some additional support. We don't necessarily need therapy because what we need is the help to get us through this sort of season, what is occurring. But we don't necessarily meet criteria for a diagnosis or have specific symptoms. We're really at a place where we need stability, and confidence building. We have coping mechanisms. We're able to bring them forth, but for whatever reason, they're overtopped or we don't have access to our support system. So imagine graduating college. In college, you've got a whole built-in system. You've got your friends, you've got the college counseling center, you've got profs, you've got a day-to-day, life set up, maybe you have a job, and then you graduate. And we don't, as a culture, give you any way of, we just throw you to the wolves. Like, maybe you can go home and live with your parents while you job hunt. Maybe you've got roommates. Maybe you already have a job. Like, everybody has to try to figure it out. But there is that loss of what they had in terms of structural systems that we don't have a way of replacing. And right now, the only way is to go to therapy. And therapy isn't actually all that awesome at giving you stability because it's so focused on change and growth. And so same thing with things like divorce, or moving, or a breakup, even a friend breakup. I think the political world has made it quite difficult for people to feel like they can trust their friend group or go deep. And so there's a big group of people who need connection and human support to get them through what they're currently going through, but they don't necessarily need to focus on symptoms or make change. They just need stabilization and maybe somebody help them problem solve with. And then the other thing that I was seeing missing in mental health is that we don't have a structured way to help people celebrate. We don't bring that in a way that people would then know what the celebration script is. They don't know how to feel proud of themselves. Like we culturally tamp that down as much as possible. Be humble. Sit down. And so I wanted to bring celebration as something that is a type of support so that you get the promotion or you have learned something new that is radically changing how you view yourself. I want to celebrate that. I want to help us to look at ourselves and be proud. Because again, that's healing. And the other thing with celebration is that I think people avoid it without recognizing that they're avoiding it, because it's really easy to do. We will let you avoid celebration because to have earned something is to have made trade-offs or have to put in a level of effort that sometimes brings with it some sadness because there were trade-offs or because you had to work so hard. And by celebrating the accomplishment, you have sort of the other side of the coin, which is what you had to endure. And sometimes when we look at how proud we are, those creeping feelings of sadness can come in and people are like, I don't want that. And so I'm not going to celebrate. So that's the other thing that I feel like bringing to the world. I have the way I've set Parathera up is that there are 4 different kinds of supports that you can ask for. And this is for a number of reasons, but by structuring it, it means that you know what you're getting and I know how to give it to you. And so the first one is that you get to vent. And this one really is just sort of the emotional outpouring. Whatever it is, you get to be heard, but we're not going to move it to problem solving. We're not going to move away from the feelings. You get to tell me what happened or how you're feeling or, that kind of processing. Super important, especially before you could do something like problem solving. And problem solving, really, this one is about sort of the next right action. It's not about big world planning, the coaching. If you've got a big long-term plan, coaching is fantastic for that. But if you are swirling and you just need to get out of your head, that's where the sort of come in and next right step is or preparing you for a conversation that you're worried about. And then there's emotional boost, sort of giving you confidence. I had someone recently tell me that she's doing really hard, heavy work in therapy, and she needs a sort of ballast. She wants to be able to talk about when things were good or remember times that were easier so that she has those memories available because she's focusing so much on the other part of her experience that she wants to be able to sort of pull herself back up and out of that. And then the celebrations. And so those are the ways in which we set up this structure to offer this kind of emotional connected support that's rooted in unconditional positive regard. It's brief, it's 30 minutes ish, and affordable. We're in under $50. And that way you come when you need to, you can have as many sessions as you want to, and it is there whenever. And you don't need an intake, you don't need a diagnosis, you don't need a regular appointment slot. All of those were intended to make it so that when you need us, you know what to ask for and we're available and you can afford it. So that's really what I'm offering with Parathera. And I think it's a model that once people understand what it is and how it's useful is the sort of thing that I'm really hoping becomes kind of the second nature. Maybe you come talk to us before you decide you want to go to therapy, or maybe you're working with your therapist and you come talk to us about things that you think are too small to bring up in therapy. And that's the sort of first line that I'm hoping that people are like, I'm just going to make an appointment, talk with them first, and then I'll figure out what I'm going to do next. That's really where I'm hoping.
If people want to find out more about Parathera, how can they do that?
Yeah, so got a website, which is sort of also where you make the appointments, and that is para-thera. The company name doesn't have the dash, but the domain does, and that's partially so that people can figure out how to say it, and also that's what was available. And just to explain the name, there's like paralegal and paramedic. So a paratherapist is basically someone who is doing work upfront from what the professionals are doing, and they are assisting the people who are licensed. So the work that we at Parathera are doing is upfront of what you would expect from a more traditional therapy counseling kind of work. And so that's where the term comes from. And it actually was one of the original, back in the 70s, there were paratherapists, and they, I think now are community mental health workers. That's what the phrase has turned into. And so it's just bringing the past to the present. And then I'm also on the social media. So on Instagram, we're Try Parathera. And on Facebook, I think it's just Parathera. And then Threads is also Parathera. And I haven't made it to TikTok yet, to be perfectly honest. I haven't figured out short form video in a way that makes me feel like I can consistently put out the content that works with the TikTok algorithm. I am scared.
Yeah, I just started one for the podcast and I don't understand the algorithms at all. I'm like putting stuff out there. I'll get like maybe one like, and I'm like, I don't know. I don't know how to connect to the youth. I don't know how to use this app. So
Totally.
I've got no advice.
Okay, great. I really totally understand. Next week, there is a digital marketing class at the University of Portland, and I'm going to be their case study. So I'm hoping that these, budding digital marketers can give me some good ideas. I'm very excited to work with these college students. I think, one, because I really hope they'll connect with the product that they're going to help me market. And then two, that they'll help me explain how to do this in a way that resonates. Because this is one of those things about being an entrepreneur, is that you have to do stuff that you're not good at. I'm pretty good at like forming the business and creating the sessions and doing the work. But the marketing piece is a whole new world for me.
Yeah, I feel you. Well, Ali, I have had a great time with this conversation. Before we kind of wrap up, is there anything else that you wanted to share or any closing thoughts that you have?
I think, I really appreciated having the opportunity to talk, and thank you for just letting me sort of ramble at you.
Perfect.
Yeah. And, I think the world right now is a very difficult place. And yet, I think the opportunity to connect with people who share values, who want to be accepting, who want to tell us that fundamentally that we're okay, do exist. And so putting the work into finding them is a worthy way of using what limited resources we've got. They're there. And if there are ways that, Parathera, can help that, give hope, make connections, help people have the energy to keep moving forward. Ultimately, I think that is the goal that I have. It's there. We can do this. And it isn't just terrible.
All right. Thank you so much, Ali.
Thank you for the time. I really appreciate it, Elizabeth.
I will have a link to Parathera and the socials in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening. And again, thanks to Ali for coming on the show. If you would like to become a Patreon subscriber, where I post at least weekly some extra behind the scenes content or early access to content, you can do that at patreon.com/talkingshitabout, and that's just $5 a month. I also, in my link tree, which is in the show notes, have links to all my social media and all the different places you can listen to the podcast, as well as a link to my Amazon wish list for the last few items that I'm looking for my studio. I think there's it's mostly decorations at this point. However, there are some hexagon sound panels that I would like to get to kind of dampen the sound in here. And then there's this kind of pink canopy that I'm looking at. It's sort of like a mosquito net basically, but it's for my little guest spot to make it nice and cozy. Also, I may or may not use that spot when I'm overstimulated and need to hide out for a bit. Anyways, again, links to all of that in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you in a couple weeks for our next microsode.